and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. As always, I'm joined by Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. The big news this past week, the Tigers signed two high-leverage relievers, Kyle Finnegan during the winter meetings and Kenley Jansen a few days after the winter meetings. We're going to dig into both of those players in a few minutes, but what is your instant reaction to those bullpen upgrades? Kyle Finnegan during the winter meetings and Kenley Jansen a few days after the winter meetings.
Yeah, but it's not like it's super exciting, like get excited and go, you get some season tickets, but I think it's good. It's good. We've talked a bunch about how they need more arms in the bullpen, and this is two of the more experienced relief pitchers in baseball. You've got the number one active leader in saves in Kenley Jansen, and Kyle Finnegan's in the top 15 in active, save leaders. So it's just nice to have more options back there. Now, again, like these aren't the super high strikeout pitchers that we thought that they needed, but it does make the bullpen deeper. And I think one thing you might see from it is that they might put Will Vest in kind of that ace reliever fireman role where he's going to go in the 7th or the 8th, depending on who's coming up to the plate. And you have Jansen there as your 9th inning guy. I don't know, like Hinch has never done that before, but it feels like that might be what they do.
Well, Kenley Jansen needing 24 more saves to get to 500 saves, which would make him the third pitcher in MLB history to reach that mark. You got to think he's going to demand the closer role, that traditional 9th inning role as the closer, which then, yes, Kyle Finnegan maybe in the 8th and Will Vest, use him wherever you need him. I would have preferred Devin Williams and Kyle Finnegan this offseason, just like I would have preferred David Bednar and Kyle Finnegan at the trade deadline. But I don't think Tigers fans should be complaining about Kenley Jansen and Kyle Finnegan this offseason, not like the understandable complaints of a Rafael Montero and a Paul Sewald as the compliments to Finnegan at the trade deadline. I think my point there is like, these are two good additions to upgrade the bullpen. I didn't say great additions and I didn't say bad additions. I think these are good additions. I think these are your high floor, low ceiling type of additions. There's really no upside to tap into. There are some concerns about regression, but at the very worst, I think it's going to be a 3.50 ERA for each of these guys. And that's at the very worst. It's pretty much what you get when you sign a 38-year-old Kenley Jansen and a 34-year-old Kyle Finnegan. I do still think the Tigers need more swing and miss in their bullpen because Jansen and Finnegan are not going to miss enough bats. Like for Kyle Finnegan, he ranks in the 44th percentile with a 24.6% whiff rate in 2025. And for Jansen, he ranks in the 54th percentile with a 25.8% whiff rate in 2025. The Tigers still don't have a reliever who is capable of missing bats at a 30% rate. So that's going to be a problem. But I feel a lot better about Kenley Jansen, Kyle Finnegan, and Will Vest in high leverage situations than I did when the Tigers entered the offseason with Will Vest and literally nobody else. So I guess it's a positive way to spin this if that's the kind of optimism you're looking for. Kenley Jansen, Kyle Finnegan, we will get into them more in just a few minutes. But the Drew Anderson signing, that became official. 1 year, $7 million with a $10 million club option. Some say there's no such thing as a bad 1-year deal. But do you think the Tigers overpaid for Drew Anderson? Like we didn't know the financial terms of the contract when we recorded our last episode. But at the time, I guess somewhere around $5 to $6 million for Anderson in 2026 with a $9 to $10 million club option for 2027. So I think the Tigers did overpay at $7 million, but only by like $2 million. So it's not that big of a deal. The more that I evaluate the signing and the more that I talk to people in the baseball industry, I do worry about Drew Anderson making the transition back to MLB from the KBO League in South Korea. At the KBO League, it's like AA, only without as much stuff from the pitcher. So not as much velocity, not as much movement. Like it's really not a big surprise that Drew Anderson went to Korea and absolutely dominated. The reason I'm worried about the transition back to the big leagues is that Drew Anderson has never had success in the big leagues. This is a guy who owns a 6.50 ERA in parts of 5 MLB seasons. He spent the past 4 seasons in Asia, including the past 2 in Korea, and it was dominant in 2025. It was outstanding. It was a 2.25 ERA with a whopping 245 strikeouts across 171 in 2/3 innings in 30 starts. The adjustments were real, so that gives me a little bit of hope. That's why I think there is that upside. There's more velocity, a new kick changeup that missed bats, and then general improvement with his other secondary pitches. But nobody knows how he's going to perform in the big leagues, and he doesn't even have the slightest bit of track record of good performance in the big league. So with no track record and one successful season in the KBO league, which is like worse than AA, Tigers paid him $7 million for 2026. That's why I'm a little bit concerned about Drew Anderson. I don't care that it was maybe an overpay by $2 million. I'm more concerned about the transition from Korea back to the United States.
Yeah, I mean, you made the comparison, I think, at the time to the Cody Pontes deal, which I think is apt because Cody Pontes was same age and had slightly better numbers than Anderson, but he won all the awards over there, but the numbers were pretty close. And Pontes got a 3-year, $30 million deal, so $10 million a year. And there's another pitcher who came back from Asia, Anthony Kay, got 2 years and $12 million from the White Sox. So it's kind of in between those two. It feels like a lot because this was a guy that they had, spring trading a couple of years ago as just a guy they claimed off the streets. But this is one of those situations where it's tough to know what other teams might have been offering him. You kind of have to trust that the Tigers had an idea that this was the going price. Who knows? I thought that about Tarik Skubal last year too, and who knows if anybody else was going after him. But I don't think, you look at the projections, he's projected for like one more, slightly over one more by Steamer and these other projection services, and who knows? But if you get one more out of him, that's like the going rate for one more is like somewhere between $7 and $11 million.
Yeah, I guess another way to look at this is what starter would you rather have for $7 million? I think that's a fair question. I also think it's fair to have expected the Tigers to spend for a frontline starter like a Michael King or a Zach Gallen instead of going after Drew Anderson to be your fifth starter or maybe even get pushed to the bullpen. So I don't care about the Tigers overpaying maybe by $2 million or so. I do have some concerns about Drew Anderson making the transition back to the big leagues after 4 seasons overseas. Another move that was made, the Tigers traded reliever Chase Lee to the Blue Jays to open up a spot on the 40-man roster. There are 38 players on the 40-man roster. The Tigers still need to add Drew Anderson, Kyle Finnegan, and Kenley Jansen. So someone else is going to get designated for assignment or traded. Who do you think is on the chopping block? For me, I think all the pitchers are probably safe. I think we're going to see a position player get removed from the 40-man roster. Who is that going to be? Justyn-Henry Malloy is at the top of my list. I would say Trey Sweeney, but the Tigers need someone to be their everyday shortstop in AAA Toledo and come up to help the big league club if, say, a Javi Baez gets injured or Zach McKinstry goes down. It's funny when you talk about Trey Sweeney in that light, though, because you remember when Trey Sweeney saved the 2024 season and Thayron Liranzo was a top 100 prospect. Those were the players from the Dodgers in the Jack Flaherty trade, and a lot has changed since then. Like Trey Sweeney quickly becoming an afterthought in the Tigers' long-term plans. And Thayron Liranzo, he's a strikeout machine who literally can't play defense. So much for the Tigers winning that trade. But Justyn-Henry Malloy, Trey Sweeney, those are maybe 2 names to watch. The Tigers need to make some space in the 40-man.
It's funny. I didn't consider position players at all. I mean, there are some that I might get rid of. I've never been the biggest Chase Young fan, but I don't think you can cut a former first-rounder right now. I thought that it was probably going to be Bailey Horn or Drew Summers. 2 of the lefties in the bullpen who, I go back and forth with those. They clearly like Bailey Horn. They've claimed him twice, but that also means that they DFA'd him once already. With Bailey Horn, I think they like his stuff, right? And he's gotten some strikeouts at the big league level. He doesn't throw enough strikes, which has always been an issue, but they clearly like his arm. They've claimed him twice. With Summers, technically they traded for him. So I don't know if that makes them like him more than Horn, but they also, the guy that they got for Chase Lee, it'll be interesting to see if they make another move like that where they just trade somebody who's on the 40-man for somebody who doesn't have to be in the 40-man. But the guy they got for Chase Lee kind of fills the same role that Drew Summers might as this lefty ground ball specialist reliever. But we'll see. I mean, those are the 2 names that jumped out to me. But yeah, I'm really interested. If they do remove a position player, I imagine that position player is going to get snapped up pretty quickly.
We'll see what happens. I know with the pitchers, the Tigers definitely like Drew Summers. They've like Bailey Horn. I mean, they went out and, like you said, they acquired him twice. So that's somebody that they like, and they need as many lefty relievers as they can. Like that is an area of need for them. And so to be able to hold on to those 2 guys would make some sense. But I really do think Justyn-Henry Malloy is someone to watch. Like that could be next man up on the chopping block, maybe even just for position players if you want to look at it that way, only because the Tigers already have Jahmai Jones in that role. But wouldn't it be a bummer, for the Tigers, right? Like you remember when the Tigers acquired Justyn-Henry Malloy from the Braves for Joe Jimenez, a high leverage reliever. And it was the first significant trade made by President of Baseball Operations Scott Harris. He called Malloy somebody who could reshape the Tigers' offensive identity. And how did that trade work out for the Tigers? Well, Jahan in 123 games in the big leagues, hitting .209 with a .311 on base percentage. and a 657 OPS. And like Thayron Liranzo, he literally can't play defense. So I think that's why he could be removed from the 40-man roster. And I'm not even sure that Scott Harris can hang his hat on the Gregory Soto trade. Like, the Tigers traded a hard-throwing left-handed reliever with a 30% whiff rate, plus Cody Clemens, for Matt Vierling, Nick Maton, Donnie Sands. Like, wouldn't it be nice to have Gregory Soto in the 2026 bullpen, especially since he has cut down on the walks since leaving the Tigers? I'm just saying, I don't really know how much Scott Harris can hang his hat on when it comes to the trades, especially when you go back and you consider the Joe Jimenez trade, the Gregory Soto trade, the Jack Flaherty trade. But as for the question, for me, it's Justyn-Henry Malloy as the next man up on the chopping block. Then it's Trey Sweeney, Jace Young, Bailey Horn in some order after J.N. And I think you're right to keep an eye on Bailey Horn, keep an eye on Drew Summers, although I think the Tigers are going to keep both those guys just because they need left-handed relievers. Outside of a couple of them, they don't have anybody.
The one other name I thought for a pitcher was Sawyer Gipson-Long. Now, we're not that long away from them really liking him and thinking he can help them as a starter and out of the bullpen. He just was not very good last year. And there was some other stuff going on there. I don't want to get too into it, but he's another one that they might be able to kind of sneak through, keep in the organization. But I don't know. Yeah, it'll be fascinating. Like, I could see with Malloy, as you said, there's not really any place for him to play, but I don't know. We'll find out. It's going to be a really interesting decision.
Let's get into the big two. Question one of the big two. Do you think the dominance that Kyle Finnegan displayed after the trade deadline will continue for the 2026 and 2027 seasons with the Tigers, or do you see him regressing with hitters adjusting to his new splitter-heavy pitch mix? Now, the Tigers signed Kyle Finnegan to a 2-year, $19 million contract with the chance to earn another $1 million in incentives. So the deal can max out at 2 years, $20 million. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if those are the options, I think we're not going to see that kind of dominance because we already saw it kind of go away in the postseason. He pitched, seven postseason innings, 7 hits, 3 earned runs, only 3 strikeouts, I think. When teams saw him multiple times, they were able to kind of just spit on one of his pitches and look for the other one, and they were able to get some hits. So I also don't expect him to just be that exact same guy. And even if he is, that they'll adjust at some point. I'd like to see them fold the slider back in. He only threw 11 sliders with the Tigers and none in September. It doesn't have to be a ton. It's just something to make batters think about another pitch. Get it up to, it was at like 5%, get up to 10%. And the other thing you could do, and he's never thrown a sinker or a 2-seamer. Maybe, on Baseball Savant, he's got one, which is probably an accident. That's not a hard pitch to learn, really. You just move your fingers on the ball and it doesn't necessarily have to be good again, right? It's just something else to put a little wrinkle in the pitch, in the baseball to make hitters think. And I don't think those are terribly hard changes to make. And I don't know if they'll keep him as dominant in terms of the swing and miss stuff, but I think it'll keep him good.
Yeah, for starters, I like this deal, both for the Tigers and for Kyle Finnegan, because Kyle Finnegan wanted to re-sign with the Tigers. The Tigers wanted to re-sign Finnegan. So when you consider the mutual interest, I think it would have been a big mistake for the Tigers to let him slip away. President of Baseball Operations, Scott Harris, he did not let that happen. Tigers might have preferred a 1-year contract. So I think agreeing to a 2-year deal here, that tells me the Tigers have a willingness to compromise and they had a greater sense of urgency about fixing this bullpen, going out and getting Kyle Finnegan, even if it was on a 2-year deal, whereas maybe they would have preferred just a 1-year contract. I think it was a good signing. The Tigers have been interested in him for a long time. When you go back to last offseason, they wanted him. They wanted him at the trade deadline, and then they wanted him again this offseason. So you got 3 instances of the Tigers wanting Kyle Finnegan. Clearly, this organization likes him, but I do have some concerns. Like, yes, he made some significant changes when the Tigers acquired him from the Washington Nationals at the trade deadline. And he saw the strikeout rate. It jumped. It jumped from about 20% with the Nationals to 35% with the Tigers. It was a huge jump in strikeout rate, and that's because he threw more splitters than fastballs for the first time in his career. The Nationals never told him to do it. Comes over the Tigers, and they say, hey, throw your splitter more than your fastball. It's your best pitch. Let it rip. So we saw him do that, and upon joining the Tigers, he had a 1.50 ERA, and that ranked 21st among 261 relievers with at least 10 innings after the July 31st trade deadline. So he was among the best in baseball post-trade deadline after the Tigers had him make these changes. But there are 2, what I'm going to call yellow flags. I'm not going to call them red flags, but I'm going to call them yellow flags. The lesser concern for me is the injury history. There isn't any. This is a guy who has been healthy for his entire career, and then he comes to the Tigers, and the Tigers use him for 14 1/3 innings in August, more than any other month in his career. What happens? He suffers a groin strain, sidelines him for nearly 3 weeks. So yes, he is the definition of durable, and he's never had a significant arm injury. But if the Tigers continue to push Kyle Finnegan into a multi-inning role, which is required of all their relievers, anybody who pitches for AJ Hinch, you're going 1+. Like, that is a rule when you're pitching in the Tigers bullpen. His health is going to be tested in ways that it never has before. And for a guy who is 34 going on 35, that gives me a little bit of worry. The greater concern for me, though, is when you do make this change in your pitch mix and you shift from what was 65% fastballs and 30% splitters with the Nationals to 41% fastballs and 55% splitters with the Tigers, hitters are going to eventually adjust. And we saw that happen with the Tigers. He kept increasing the splitter usage month on month and month. But the whiff rate, it trended in the wrong direction. His overall whiff rate, 51% in August. So it boomed immediately. Right when he started throwing more splitters, he got way more swings and misses. From there, 51% in August, 26.1% in September, and 21.9% in October. So from 51% to 26% to 22%. That's how the whiff rate went after Kyle Finnegan made the adjustment to throwing more splitters. So we already saw hitters adjust to that quickly. They laid off the fastball. They sat on the splitter to put balls in play. And sure enough, opponents, they had less than a 100 batting average, less than a .05 batting average against the splitter in August. And then it jumped over 300 and then over 250 in September and October, respectively. So I think the book is out on Finnegan. I like to see him increase the slider usage or maybe like redistribute this fastball a little bit more. I think that is probably a way to keep hitters off the splitter, but this is a really smart league. Hitters are going to adjust. That gives me a little bit of concern. Question 2 of the big 2. Does Kenley Jansen have one more year of success in the tank, or will Father Time catch up to him, considering all the signs of regression that could be coming in the 2026 season? The Tigers signed Kenley Jansen to a 1-year contract with a club option. We don't know about the money on the club option, but there's a report out there that Jansen will make $11 million in 2026. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think success is possible for sure. I don't think he's going to be dominant by any means. It's funny when you look at his career, heading through 2017, he looked like he was going to challenge Mariano Rivera as like the greatest closer of all time. He was on an epic run. And then he's had this 8-9 year run of just being really good, not like super elite anymore. And then last year, the strikeouts cratered. There were a lot of, like you mentioned, there are a lot of signs that he was, getting kind of lucky and headed for some regression. At the same time, he was still effective. People remember the Tigers, if they watched that game, the Tigers put 6 runs against him in 2/3 of an inning, 3 home runs. That was more than a third of all the earned runs he gave up all season. He just, I want to say he was coming off a slight injury, or he hadn't pitched in like 8 days when they faced him, and he was definitely not sharp. But other than that, it was a solid season. It just, all the underlying numbers, the left on base percentage was super high. The BABIP was super low. The batting average on balls in play. All these things suggest that he's going to have uglier numbers this year. But the Tigers know this, right? Like, this is stuff that has been known for by public analysts for more than a decade. It's kind of, it reminds me of the Alfredo Simon trade where everybody was like, you sure about that? And then he turned out to be bad. And I'm hoping that's not the case here. But I have to believe that the Tigers, because I do think that they're a very smart, forward-thinking organization with pitching, have some ideas of what actually happened, what actual talent is still left there, and what they can do to help them get better. So I do think there's going to be success, but I just, I'm not sure that he's going to be the dominant closer that the people really want.
Or that the Tigers really need. I mean, that's the big concern for me. And you go back to May 2nd when the Tigers tagged him for 6 earned runs. That outing was an outlier. Like, it was a 0.00 ERA in 8 innings before that game and a 1.97 ERA in 50 1/3 innings after that game. But the reality is he just wasn't missing bats and generating enough strikeouts. Like, his strikeout rate, his whiff rate in 2025, they were the worst marks of his career. 3 of his 4 lowest strikeout rates and 3 of his 4 lowest whiff rates have occurred over the past 3 seasons. So this is a guy who has continually now struggled to miss bats and struggled to get strikeouts, and it hit a career worst point in 2025. That's the reason why I'm concerned. And you mentioned so many great things, like even beyond the strikeout and the whiff rate struggles. You're right. Like, the batting average on balls in play, like, it was an unsustainably low mark. The FIP, that suggested that the ERA outperformed the underlying metrics. You look at the strikeout to walk ratio, like less separation than ever before between strikeouts and walks. And then you go career worst marks in average exit velocity, hard hit rate, fly ball rate. And then you mentioned even the left on base rate. Like it was the third highest rate of him stranding runners in his career. It's almost impossible to sustain that, which points towards more runs being scored against him in the future. So those are all reasons why I think 2026 could be a disaster for Kenley Jansen. However, another way to look at this situation is this is Kenley Jansen. He is a 4-time All-Star, 2020 World Series champion. What if this guy has like just one more year of above average results left in the tank? And if that's the case, then the Tigers will get 60 innings of quality performance because of his durability, and Jansen will get another 24 saves to reach the 500 milestone because the Tigers are going to be a good team on the field. So I think it's easy to see why these two sides were a perfect match. The Tigers liked Kenley Jansen last offseason. They liked him this offseason. They didn't sign him last offseason, but they ended up signing him this offseason. And to your point, the Tigers are known for helping pitchers develop, and that's not just rookies who are breaking into the league. They want to be able to help out veterans as well. So we saw Kenley Jansen. He's leaned heavily on the cutter for a long, long time, including in 2025 with the Angels. He threw that pitch 81, 82% of the time, and it was averaging right around 93 miles an hour. I think he could benefit from increasing the sinker usage, increasing the slider usage with the Tigers in 2026 in an effort to miss more bats. I think if he's willing to make some changes, even in his age 38 season, then the Tigers pitching department has the smarts to provide a plan for him to increase the strikeout rate. And I think if that happens, then maybe we do see Kenley Jansen as the Tigers closer for the next 2 seasons. But there's also a world in which he crashes and burns and he cashes in his $11 million in 2026, and then we don't hear from him ever again. So all in all, I think the Tigers, they definitely address their bullpen need by going out and getting 2 high leverage relievers in free agency, Kyle Finnegan and Kenley Jansen. I don't think signing Kenley Jansen is the same as Edwin Diaz going to the Dodgers or Devin Williams going to the Mets or Ryan Helsley going to the Orioles. But I think it's a step in the right direction for the Tigers, even if Kenley Jansen carries some big concerns.
I just want to add one thing here is that if they have a plan, there's one very clear area where he needs to help this year, and that's against left-handed hitters. And it's something that you wouldn't expect for a guy who throws a lot of cutters. Cutters are generally supposed to be, neutralizing opposite side hitters. But if you look at the numbers, he had 33 strikeouts and 3 walks against right-handed hitters last year in 20 or 30 innings. And against lefties, it was 24 strikeouts and 16 walks in 28 innings. So something with his pitching against left-handed batters was an issue there. And if the Tigers have a way to fix that, then maybe you could get a very strong season from him again.
Kenley Jansen, time to learn the splitter. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we return, we're joined by Geoff Pontes from Baseball America to talk about Tigers prospects. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Geoff Pontes, prospect writer for Baseball America, to the days of our podcast. He has been here before, and we're lucky to have him again. We've got a lot of Tigers prospects to discuss as we look ahead to the 2026 season. Geoff Pontes, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Evan, man. Happy to be here. Fun time of year, off-season list time for us. We got the handbook coming out going out to press in a couple of days. You won't have it until next month, but yeah, so it's probably strangely my busiest time of the year, even though there's no baseball being played, really, outside of lead almost.
Thank you for making time for us, and we'll start with the fresh Tigers prospect news. The Tigers just lost right-handed reliever RJ Petit to the Colorado Rockies with the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 Rule 5 draft. Do you think the Tigers made a mistake in not protecting him, or is he someone they won't really miss?
I think generally probably not somebody that they're going to miss. I mean, it was an interesting pick. He was definitely a guy, we do a ton of Rule 5 work, of course. He was definitely a guy that popped for us and teams were sort of looking at initially. But I think the other way to look at it, kind of the silver lining, is that your system is at a point where you have enough players that you have some difficult decisions to make in terms of who's going to get protected from the Rule 5, the spots that are available on the 40-man roster. And we'll talk about some of the guys that they did protect. Are there maybe one or two guys you could say, yeah, I'd rather have Petit than Valencia or whoever? Okay. In the big scheme of things, though, I don't think that, you lost a Garrett Whitlock. I don't think it's going to be Shane Smith or somebody like that, jumps into a rotation or is like a really dominant reliever. It's good stuff. The secondaries in particular, missed bats. It's a good slider. Had a high whiff rate, high chase rate on that pitch last year. The fastball performed okay. Gets decent extension, but I don't think it's somebody where I look at the numbers, I look at the performance, I watch the video on Synergy and I'm like blown away. It was more like, all right, this is a reasonable pick. And, we're hearing a lot of buzz from teams that this is somebody to go after. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a mistake, especially when it's a reliever like this. You can acquire these guys, fairly easily. And I think even some of the guys that they might have protected on the 40-man roster might yield a better reliever in trade a few months down the road.
Speaking of a reliever in trade, Tigers just traded Chase Lee for Johan Simon. And I know the Blue Jays are one of the teams you cover. I don't know if that's one of the chapters you have to get put in there, but I don't know what you have on Simon. Did you have him in your top 30 before you got traded?
I didn't have Simon in my top 30. I mean, he would have been, so we do a 31 to 40 section, and he probably would have fallen into that group. And I think some of it is like they have a decent amount of starting pitching prospects now. I've kind of said for a few years that I thought that system was a little underrated. They didn't have a lot of top end prospects. They've kind of caught up in that regard with Parker, Namala. Of course, Savage is still prospect eligible, and a handful of other guys. So it's a little deeper system than I think people recognize. It's one of the reasons Simone wasn't in there. But like, I'm also doing the Cubs, and if Simone was in the Cubs system, he probably would have been like 21. So I mean, it's all a matter of like what else is around him. That said, pure left-hander, sinker ball guy. I think he had 66% ground ball rate. Sinkers, sinker slider type of guy that's going to drive a ton of top spin, really kill launch. To the useful reliever. And I could see what the value of that deal was, for the Tigers of like, hey, maybe this guy's a year away, but we're past the Rule 5. We don't have to make a decision on him for another year. And, maybe he develops into, a ground ball driving weapon out of the bullpen, which is super valuable. I think, people tend to think that it always has to be strikeouts and guys just kind of blowing you away out of the pen. The ability to have somebody that comes in that just kills launch and gets bad ground balls and, just lets your infield kind of do the work are valuable too. So that's kind of where he falls into. I mean, it's probably more of a middle reliever, low leverage, situational usage, but certainly that could improve if the Tigers have, some sort of game plan for him.
So we saw Baseball America just unveiled its top 10 prospects for the Tigers in the 2026 preseason. Here's the list in order. Number 1, Kevin McGonigle. Number 2, Max Clark. Number 3, Bryce Rayner. Number 4, Josue Briseño. Number 5, Jordan Yost. Number 6, Hao-Yu. Number 7, Max Anderson. Number 8, Chris Rodriguez. Number 9, Franerber Montilla. And number 10, Michael Oliveto. What stands out to you about that crop of 10 players, especially with them all being position players?
Yeah, I think it's the offensive upside. I've known Chris for a long time. I can kind of remember the last rebuild and all the pitchers that were up top. Obviously, Skubal was the one that really paid off. We didn't get much from Matt Manning, but I think, when you look at the top now, it's a lot easier to look at this top 10 and see, a handful of regulars are better, and particularly at the top of the list. McGonigle, if it wasn't for Connor Griffin, who I think is one of the best prospects that I've ever covered, in my 10 plus years of doing this, probably is the number one prospect going away. We put a 70 hit on him. There were debates kind of internally about whether we could put an 8 on it. I think the last guy that we did that with was Vlad Guerrero Jr. You see how that works out. $500 million contract, not too bad of a season himself. And then I think you go to guys like Max Clark. And I think there's some debate about like how much impact Clark is going to have. He hits the ball hard. He puts in the work. He's got a good feel for who he is and the things that he needs to improve, that I honestly think like those angles will get better. He's going to start to hit for more pull side power. And he's a really good all around baseball player. Like there's a high baseball IQ there. He's going to be good in the outfield. He runs the bases well. It's always a competitive at bat. He doesn't give anything away on the field. Now, maybe maybe Walker Jenkins ends up being better. I don't know. Jenkins needs to stay on the field. Even when Max gets hit in the hand, he was back in the lineup 4 days later. I think there's just an element with him where he's just a gamer. So I think you can feel really good about that. Rayner isn't, I'm thinking of Bryce Rayner, and it's kind of like the question with Rayner is like, how is this going to trend? Is it going to be more of like a power hitting third baseman? Is he going to be able to stick at shortstop long term? I think he's got a better shot of doing that than McGonigle does. And, how does the hit tool track? Because it looked really good in a small sample size last year. The power looked really good in a small sample size last year. How does that look in a full season? But he's a really high-end prospect. He's somebody that we can look at and say, yeah, this is a potential number one next year if Clark and McGonigle graduate like we think they will in 26. And could be somebody that frankly is like a top 10 prospect a year from now, especially like a good, healthy season. Could go a long way. He's got all the tools, all the ability. Briseño's really interesting. Not somebody that you want to have as like a number one prospect in your system. But I think when you're talking about a 3 or a 4 or 5, legitimate power hitter with bat to ball skills, with plate approach. I mean, he's kind of a hitter with this enormous power. The question with him is just in velocity. Is he going to struggle against major league quality velocity when he's seeing 95 to 99 a lot more? I tend to think guys like this can make that adjustment. We'll just have to see. And the problem with that profile a little bit is like, he's not a catcher. He caught more this year than I anticipated he would, but I'm sure, you guys have watched enough Briseño behind the plate to see that like the hands and actions aren't great. The transfers aren't great. There's arm power. I mean, there's no question about that. But, that's a tough profile. I mean, because it's probably a first baseman DH, and you really got to hit to be able to maintain that as an everyday player. There are a lot less everyday first base DH guys, I think, than we realize, right? There's probably 45 between like the combined two, because there's a lot of teams that kind of use that DH spot as more fluid, or platoon first base like the Red Sox did last year. So you really got to hit. You really got to hold that up. And I think there is the ability with Briseño to kind of follow a similar path to like a Vinny Pasquantino, where he has really good plate skills, good bat to ball. He makes good swing decisions. And then there's this outlier power that he doesn't necessarily always have to sell out for. And I think that would be a really good outcome. I think the rest of the top 10, there's some upside here, depending upon who you talk to. The day of the draft, Michael Oviedo was an incredible pick or was a terrible pick. It seemed like he was very divisive. I will say the analysts that I trust the most amongst my contacts were pro Oviedo. That tends to give me more confidence, even if a lot of my scout friends were less into it. So there are some traits, there are some abilities there. He's a Northeast prep kid as well. So I think, all that stuff probably plays into there being maybe a little bit more upside than people even realize. The other one I want to call out is Frenier Montilla. Did I say that right? I butcher names. I'm from Massachusetts. We don't speak English correctly. But he's a guy dating back to a year ago. I was getting really great feedback from the Tigers PD people. And I think he's somebody that if you watch the synergy video, the hitting is fine. The defense is really good. Like, he's pretty slick out there. And, I don't know if, he's a shortstop long-term. Could be. But they can probably play this guy just about anywhere in the infield, and he's going to be plus, with a huge arm as well. He's one of the better infield defenders that I've watched video on this offseason. So I think you look at some of these guys, and then, you have some bats in here like Lee and Anderson, Rodriguez, who's a little bit more raw, but there's huge upside there. I think you look at it, it's a really good top 10. I mean, it's definitely pulled up heavily by the top 4, but that's not a bad problem to have. I mean, the thing that we've noticed over the years, and we track back to like our rankings and our top 100, those high-end guys tend to be the ones that we have way higher hit rates on than the guys that are like below 50. So when we do our prospect rankings, and we have like a formula that we use, it's kind of based on a driveline method. Guys that have, these high-end talents like McGonigle, a Clark, a Rayner, that's going to push you up into that top 10. That there's even a chance that this is like a top 3-4 system because of that.
You mentioned a lot of names. One name you did not mention, Thayron Liranzo, the switch hitting catcher whom the Tigers acquired in the Jack Flaherty trade. What happened to him? He went from the back of top 100 list for all MLB prospects to now being off the Tigers' top 10 list. Like, the abundance of strikeouts, the lack of defense, like, those are real problems. But are you worried about him from a long-term standpoint as we sit here today?
Yeah, I think you have to be. At this point, like, I think you want to give a switch hitting catcher a little bit more time. It takes catchers a little bit more time. It typically takes switch hitters a little bit more time. He's got this outlier power, hit balls 114 this year, 106.2, 90th percentile. So the EVs, all that sort of stuff, the contact quality is there. It's really good angles and his hardest hit balls as well. But you can't run a 30% in zone strikeout rate. I'm sorry. No, regardless of how much power you have. I mean, we've seen what it's been with like a Spencer Jones, for example, who's a better athlete and has more tools than Liranzo does. He's really a bat first prospect, and there's questions about his defense, just like there are with Briseño. But I think when you compare the two players, it's like, yeah, this guy has just as much power as Briseño does, but Briseño knows how to hit. You know, his swing decisions are better. His bat to ball ability is significantly better. Maybe he gives up a little bit in terms of loft on the angles, but like he'll take that for guys that actually make contact, that actually do damage, right? There's a balance in terms of the hit tool feeding the power and the power feeding the hit tool. They're not kind of on an island, right? It's a 30 hit. You know, it might be worse. It might be a 20 hit, you know, if you really want to get aggressive. In the receiving behind the plate, I think the body is backed up over the last couple of years. You know, he got a ton of hype coming out of the complex. And I think a lot of these Dodgers guys do. The guys that they've traded more often than not have really not worked out the other places that they've gone, you know, with the exception of maybe a couple of pitchers, Pepio and some of these guys. But yeah, I think you look at Liranzo right now and you kind of have to wonder if there's just enough hit there for him to have a consistent, valuable major league role. And we talked about earlier when talking about Briseño with the much better skills of the struggles of being a first base DH type of prospect. And if he doesn't have the hit tool, it's not going to work. So the catching has to get better. We're just going to figure out how to make more contact. I mean, he could still swing and miss. Like, he could still run a 40 hit tool, but it's got to be a 40. You know, it's got to at least be like, yeah, I can get on base 10% of the time and keep the strikeout rate around 30% or whatever. And I think, like, you know, he's at a point now where you put a guy like this into the big leagues in the next couple of years, he's probably going to run like a 50% strikeout rate. Like, it's just going to embarrass you. You can't do it. So he's gotten passed by other guys. And I think that it's a really tricky profile, though he has a ton of upside. I mean, there's 40 home run power, you know, in that bat, but you got to be able to get to it. So I think ultimately that's what the issue is. The hit tool just continued to back up, body's backed up a little bit, and it's turning into an empty power profile a little bit.
Well, I mean, you touched briefly on another catcher, Michael Oliveto there. At least he was drafted as a catcher. And I was curious, you know, we don't get these draft picks for the most part, don't get to play, you know, the Gulf Coast League or whatever, Florida Complex League, I guess you call it now, is basically done by the time these guys get in there. So there's a bridge league and there's very little coverage of that. And I thought if anybody knew anything about how Oliveto looked and Jordan Yost looked, it might be you. So I don't know if you heard anything at all or we're just kind of out of luck.
That Clearwater pod is really tough because the Yankees don't like to play games. And this is consistent with my spring training. It's why I see the Blue Jays play the Phillies like 15 times. The Yankees don't like to play games. The Blue Jays kind of shuttered down a little bit this year too and didn't play a lot of games. I mean, I was getting like, oh yeah, I saw JoJo Parker once, you know, on the backfields. Like, it wasn't like previous years where it's like, yeah, I saw you Savage throw through this, blah, blah, blah. It was like, no, I didn't see any of these guys. So there was a limit in the number of games that were played. And it's not as organized as, you know, the FCL is, which was complex ball, right? Or even like the schedules that you get in spring training. You know, it's kind of hit or miss. Stuff gets banged pretty easily. So I didn't get a ton of feedback there on him or Yost. I'll probably reserve any opinions on that until next March, where I'm sure I'll see a ton of those guys, as I always do. But yeah, no, I didn't. And I also don't cover the Tigers. This is JJ. So I was making less calls on that and more calls on Jays, Astros, Cardinals, Cubs, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was hoping they might have snuck in there against a couple Blue Jays games or whatever, but no, I get it. And the other thing is, you know, we talked about this top 10 had no pitchers in it. And they kind of went pitcher heavy after those top two. And I don't know if there's anybody from the draft last year's Malachi Witherspoon, Ben Jacobs, Caleb Blaze. They took Grayson Grenzel, Gail Whitwiska. Again, this is, you know, JJ's org, but I don't know if there's any of those names that you saw as amateurs or that you thought maybe were interesting prospects.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's the biggest name out of these guys, but I like Witherspoon. You know, his brother, you know, obviously twin brothers got drafted this year. His brother Kyson is more polished. Malachi's stuff is just as good. I mean, it's loud. When we were looking at the stuff scores, and they don't always translate 1-to-1 from college. It's a different baseball. Just like it is like, you know, when you're looking at numbers in high A or low A and then triple A, when they finally switched to the actual major league ball, there's some difference in IVP or HB and some of that stuff. But the translation, like, he had some of the loudest stuff scores, like, across the board. If you can get this guy to throw more strikes more consistently, and I think like college ERAs, college walk rates are really noisy. And they're really noisy because some of the zones are weird, frankly. And some of the attack plans that these kids get in college just don't make any sense. You got guys with high ride four-seamers that were throwing the ball low in the zone and getting crushed or unable to, I don't know, I can't spot it there. It's like, yeah, because your pitch doesn't move that way. It's like you have an old school pitching coach that's forcing you to throw a certain way. I'm not saying that was the case at Oklahoma, but we see a lot of gains when these guys come into pro ball and we see better strike throwing and we also often see them show a little bit more polish. So I don't think he's probably a reliever, but I don't think that the door is closed on him potentially starting. The stuff is really good. And I think that's the gambles you have to take. Like just looking at like the Cardinals system that I do. You look at their last couple of years in the draft of actually drafting some guys with stuff versus the years of taking every lefty with a good K to BB rate that threw 90 miles an hour on the West Coast. It's like, yeah, those guys will be competitive and will get to AAA. They might be good back end starters and give you some depth, but you don't want to take Michael McGreevy in the first round. You want to take these bigger stuff guys that maybe have a little bit more variance, but the upside is, tremendously higher. You can actually coax a little bit more out of those guys. So I think Witherspoon in particular is one to kind of hone in on. The other guys, I haven't seen all of them. Didn't catch a ton of those guys in the Cape the last couple of years, which is usually where, I'm seeing most of my college guys. And prep arms, man, that's probably like my biggest blind spot. I probably know international players better than I know prep arms. I'm just like high school pitchers, like you can have them.
All right, so we need to talk about Hao-Yu and Max Anderson because both of those infielders are going to get an opportunity to make the opening day roster in 2026. Both of these guys are right-handed hitting infielders. They perform better against left-handed pitchers. We're going to see Colt Keith at third base against right-handed pitchers. So do you think Lee and Anderson are simply the complements at third base against lefties, or could they be something more? Like if one of those two guys are going to become an everyday player, do you think it's going to be Hao-Yu or Max Anderson? What are your thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, I would say that it's probably going to be Hao-Yu. I really like Max Anderson. I've had a soft spot for him after he almost destroyed my camera on the Cape one time. Foul ball, came right back, knocked the camera down, put the camera back up, next pitch, bomb. He waited long enough for me to get the camera back up before he hit the bomb. So after seeing him a couple of years, just like he can hit, right? There's power there. There's a hit tool. Do I think he's got enough bat speed and that, everything's going to translate to the majors? I don't know. It's like another one of those tricky profiles where he's not really valuable defensively. You kind of got to figure out a place to play him, whether it's second, probably not third. I don't think he's a first baseman, probably doesn't hit enough for that. So it's like another one of these weird profiles, but I think it's really hard to write off like good upper minors production. So he maybe has more upside in terms of turning into an impact bat than Lee does. But I think you look at Lee and you're like, all right, like he's a good enough defender, in the infield. It's not great, but good enough. In terms of plate approach and plate skills and all that sort of stuff, it's there. He's always going to give you competitive at bats, more versatile. Yeah, I think he's probably your better bet in terms of like an everyday guy. I think they're both, for me at least, probably settle more into that like second division regular kind of role. But if you're a competitive playoff team, they're kind of a fringy starter for you. But, I think in terms of where you got these guys from, it hasn't necessarily been a bad return on, either the trade or the pick with Anderson.
As for Hao-Yu, Max Anderson, another prospect who kind of falls into that same category. Not a prospect anymore, but Jace Young. Like, have you given up on him as being a piece of the Tigers' future? Like, he just made this massive swing change. It's all about lowering his hands. It's created like a shorter, more direct swing, and that helped him hit velocity better. Do you think there's any chance that like he has one last push to burst onto the scene? Or do you think time has run out for Jace Young to be an impact player with the Tigers?
Yeah, I think it's hard to write guys off as like, it's done. It may not be here. It may not be in Detroit. It might be somewhere else. I've always thought that he could hit enough. I think the mentality is there in terms of wanting to get better at the plate. But I think he's like a lot of these Tigers prospects over the last couple of years, exclude McGonigle and Clark, where there's like really questionable defensive value, right? And I think that's been such a concern when you're looking at this lineup and how it gets structured. Is it's like, yeah, Keith can hit, like this is our best lineup, but a lot of these guys really can't defend in the infield. And if you have multiple guys like that are more or less traffic cones in the infield, it's like you're really losing, your ability to generate outs consistently. And that's unseen in some ways. Like you see the stat sheet with, the offensive numbers, but I think people really underrate how valuable steady defense is, and it's why you've had guys like Trey Sweeney getting at bats, at shortstop, et cetera, over the last couple of years, because they know he's at least a steady and influence on the dirt,
The Tigers added 5 prospects to the 40-man roster, protecting them from the Rule 5 draft. Hao-Yu, Thayron Liranzo, Jake Miller, Eduardo Valencia, and Trey Cruz. We've already talked about Lee and Liranzo, but do any of the other 3 stand out to you? Jake Miller, Eduardo Valencia, Trey Cruz.
Oh, they all kind of seem like bottom of the roster type of guys. Like, maybe I'm underselling Valencia and Trey Cruz here. I mean, good for them. I never anticipated that either of those guys would be in a 40-man roster, frankly. I thought Trey Cruz, like a few years ago, I thought he would probably be out of baseball by this point, but made some adjustments. I think it's the same with Valencia. And credit to the Tigers PD. I mean, they got a lot more out of these guys than I think, anybody would have expected or anticipated. But at the same time, like, I don't think either of these guys are everyday regulars. They seem more like fill-in players, major league depth that, can provide enough value. And they got a couple of relievers in there. I've liked Jake Miller for a little bit. I think the stuff is decent, but, nobody that you're going to look forward to in a year and be like, oh, this guy's going to have a major impact, on the Tigers being a success, winning the division, making the ALCS, whatever, the goals might be.
Last question before I get you out of here. It's about Max Clark. He's about to come to big league camp for the first time. He's going to be around guys like Tarik Skubal, Casey Mize, Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson, Kerry Carpenter, Colt Keefe. How do you think Max Clark, the personality, is going to fit into the big league clubhouse, even in spring training? Or do you think that is entirely dependent on his performance on the field?
I was somebody that was slow to come around to it because you're like, all right, this guy's like a self-promoter, blah, blah, blah. I think he just loves doing it, man. I think he loves being out there. I think he loves the spotlight. And there's good and bad with that. I'd much rather have a guy who loves the spotlight than a dude who hates being in public, right? A guy who hates having the big moments and all that sort of thing. I think this guy's playing for that. And I think the more I've seen him, you've seen him mature as well. And I've seen him mature off the field. Because the first time I met Max Clark, he was 16 years old and was like this loud, arrogant, brash kid, big social media star. If the red light was on the mic, he was happy to talk to anybody. And I think that maybe in some ways gave me and other people like a warped perception of who he is. Everybody that I know that's worked with him has said nice things about him. Players that have played with him like him, seems to get along with guys. I mean, could he rub some guys in the game the wrong way? Sure, but so does Ronald Acuna. I mean, like, there's a lot of guys that rub people the wrong way. And, let's be honest, there's some personalities in baseball where, they're a little too old school or, just a little too fake tough guy with the stuff that they think is acceptable and not acceptable. So, yeah. And I mean, you got guys like Javi Baez, others in that clubhouse that I think he'll probably click with. And I also think he's a guy that's going to probably bridge the gap with some different cultures as well. He's somebody that's, happy to mix it up with the Latin players, et cetera, mix it up with the guys from the South. I think that's one of the clubhouse things that I think people sometimes overlook in baseball is that the backgrounds are so varied between what these guys grow up with, whether that's opportunities, the countries they grow up in, the music, culture, food, all that sort of stuff. But he's a guy that, when he comes into a room, he grabs attention, talks to everybody, he looks you in the eye, he has a conversation with you, he gives people the time of day. So I got to give him credit for that. I think what people maybe see on the internet versus what he's actually like in person is very different.
All right, Geoff Pontes, thank you for joining the Days of Ver podcast to share your insights about the Tigers farm system, including the top 10 prospects as listed by Baseball America. We look forward to having you back on the show at some point in the future. Everyone, that was Geoff Pontes, prospect writer for Baseball America. We have more to discuss this week, including Tarik Skubal and the starting rotation. But first, let's take a break. All right, we're back. The Tigers at the winter meeting said that they are listening on Tarik Skubal trade offers. Does the shift from no comments at the general manager meetings to listening at the winter meetings mean anything to you?
Not really. I think it's just sort of like the responsible thing to do, for lack of a better term. I don't think they're going to trade Skubal. I don't think they want to, but I think it makes sense to come out and say they're listening. Maybe that makes teams pursuing them a little bit more likely to offer. Probably not, but at the very least, you're kind of covering your PR basis. Like, hey, we made him available, but no one met our price, which sounds better than we have no intention to trade him or sign him or build around him in 2026. So I think they're just making some noise for the sake of it.
Yeah, I'm just glad the Tigers came out from underneath the rock that they were hiding under and decided just to tell the truth about the situation. Like, of course, they're listening to trade offers. Of course, they're entertaining trade offers. Like, we've known this. The Tigers decided not to comment on it at the GM meetings because it was, quote, unfair, end quote, to both Skubal and the Tigers. Only then to comment on it 1 month later at the winter meetings, with Scott Harris saying that he's listening to trade offers. So I don't know. Are the Tigers suddenly being unfair to Skubal now by saying that they're listening? Because that's how it felt at the GM meetings. I don't know. I think the whole, like, it's unfair to comment thing was always a pile of BS, but that's how Scott Harris wanted to do it. So that's how he did it. 1 month later, it was at least refreshing to hear the Tigers tell the truth. Yes, they're listening to Tarik Skubal's trade offers. I don't think it actually matters because nothing has actually changed aside from the Tigers finally telling the truth to their fans and to Tarik Skubal. And I love that Tarik Skubal has said multiple times that he doesn't want to be traded and he doesn't understand why he's involved in trade rumors if he doesn't want to be traded. Because here's the truth, Tarik. The Tigers, they could shut all this down right now by saying they're keeping you for the 2026 season. Just like the Pirates shut down Paul Skeens' trade rumors when their front office leader came out and said not only were the Pirates keeping Skeens, but they were going to build around him and try to win with him. And Tarik Skubal, that's all Scott Harris has to do to shut down these trade rumors. Like, you don't have to hear another trade rumor if Scott Harris comes out and says he's going to keep you for the 2026 season. But the latest from Scott Harris and the Tigers is that they're listening and there are no untouchables in the Tigers organization, not even back-to-back American League Cy Young winner Tarik Skubal. Now, aside from Skubal, what did the Tigers tell us about their plans for the starting rotation at the winter meetings? We've heard the Tigers are confident in these 9 pitchers for their rotation in 2026. In the order listed by General Manager Jeff Greenberg: Tarik Skubal, Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, Reese Olson, Troy Melton, Drew Anderson, Sawyer Gibson-Long, Kader Montero, and Ty Madden, plus Jackson Jobe when he returns from Tommy John surgery in August or September. So that's 9 starters that they're counting on in 2026, but it's 10 starters with Jobe included. Now in 2025, the Tigers used 11 traditional starters. Do you like this list, or do you think the 9/10 aforementioned starters are not enough for the Tigers to be successful in 2026? Do they need more, or do they have enough with these 9 or 10 that they're rolling out?
You never have enough, right? I mean, things could go right and you don't need all those guys, but things can also go very wrong and you're going to Troy Watson or Andrew Sears down in AA or something like that, Jake Miller. I think that the bigger thing, though, is, and I believe Scott Harris mentioned it at the winter meetings, is that they might still be looking at starting pitching, but that starting pitching has to be optionable.
Right. Like, the Tigers aren't talking to Michael King or Zach Gallen or even someone like Chris Bassett. Like, it's going to have to be waiver claims, minor league signings. So no frontline starters, I would assume, to pitch behind Tarik Skubal or to pitch behind Jack Flaherty in the rotation. And I don't know, maybe that's a little risky.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the bigger issue to me. And I understand that they're, you know, when you're got a pretty good team, it's harder to make room for more players, unless you're the Dodgers. I guess they always find a way. But it's not just for this year. You got to think about next year or maybe 2028 if there is no next year. But, you know, if you're losing Skubal, you're losing Mize, you're losing Flaherty, it would be nice to have somebody who could be 1, 2, or 3 starter signed now, but that does push either, you know, probably pushes Melton out of the rotation again, or technically Reese Olson is optionable, moves one of those guys to the bullpen, and you don't want to do that. And maybe it's just something that where they'll cross that bridge when they get to it. You know, next year they'll just go out and sign a big free agent starting pitcher, but it does seem like it would be nice to have another frontline guy rather than another guy who's going to be spending half the year in Toledo.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. Like, if the good free agent starters sign elsewhere, and then the Tigers end up getting a Tarik Skubal trade offer that they can't refuse, and they trade Skubal closer to spring training, then what happens? Is Jack Flaherty really your number 1 starter? And even if the Tigers get someone like Emmett Sheehan from the Dodgers in a Skubal trade, like, are we really confident in Flaherty, Olson, and Sheehan as the top 3 starters in the rotation? I think those are some things to consider for right now. And then, yeah, like, the Tigers are going to watch Tarik Skubal, Casey Mize, and Jack Flaherty become free agents after the 2026 season. So if you go out and acquire someone like Michael King, then you have at least someone you can count on in that 2027 rotation, because as it stands right now, it's going to be Jackson Jobe, Reese Olson, and Troy Melton leading the 2027 rotation. And that's a lot of uncertainty for a lot of reasons. But the Tigers are confident in their group of 9 or 10 starters to carry them throughout the 2026 season. And unless something changes, we shouldn't expect them to make any other significant additions to the rotation. But I'd say keep an eye out for waiver claims and minor league signings. You think when you look at this situation as a whole, do you think it would be a mistake for the Tigers not to acquire another starting pitcher, specifically this offseason? Or do you like the idea of counting on Sawyer Gipson-Long, Kader Montero, Ty Madden? Like maybe one of those guys develops into something, even if they haven't to this point in their MLB careers.
I do think it would be a mistake to not go get, like I said before, you need an arm for this year and also for next year and in the future. And the one thing I will say, and I just kind of keep an eye out for this too, is I feel like they said that they were done with starting pitching last year too. Maybe I'm misremembering. But then, as January goes along and somebody's out there who is talented and the price comes down and it's only 1 year, who knows? Maybe they go and get, somebody who hasn't signed. And I would not rule that out because they do love a 1 year deal. So that's the one thing you can kind of cross your fingers for if you're hoping for a more frontline starter. But yeah, I don't know. It could come back to haunt them. Maybe not. In the future, there's technically, if Olson, Melton, and Jobe all pitch to their ability, that's a pretty solid front three. But what are the odds of that happening? It's really risky, I think. So we'll see.
Here's a fun fact. With Tarik Skubal, the Tigers rotation had a 3.91 ERA in 2025, ranking 11th among the 30 MLB teams. Without Skubal, the Tigers rotation would have had a 4.45 ERA. So it is a 3.91 ERA with Skubal, and it's a 4.45 ERA without Skubal. I think that is the number one reason to add a frontline starter right now, both for 2026 and 2027 and beyond. Before we get out of here, RJ Petit, a right-handed reliever, was selected number 1 overall by the Rockies in the Rule 5 draft. What are the odds the Tigers get him back? And could this be a Will Vest type of situation where RJ Petit gets the experience elsewhere, gets returned to the Tigers, and then becomes a real dude in the bullpen at some point in the future?
I consider it highly unlikely Petit comes back. And it's more about the Rockies than Petit. Honestly, I think Petit's fine. It should be helpful, but I'm not sure there's anything a pitcher could do on the field that could get him cut from the Rockies. They had 25 pitchers last year throw at least 10 innings, and 15 of them had an ERA above 6. There were 8 with an ERA above 7. I looked it up. Carson Palmquist, Bradley Blaylock, and Luis Peralta combined for a 9.24 ERA over 112 innings last year. They are just desperate for arms. So unless RJ Petit does something off the field, I think he's probably going to stick on that roster, and we wish him luck because that's a tough place to pitch.
Yeah, it reminded me of like the Tigers during the bad years when they hung on to their Rule 5 draft picks. Ronny Garcia in the 2020 season, Akil Baddoo in the 2021 season, Mason Engler in the 2023 season. So yes, the Rockies probably will do the same with RJ Petit, and it's maybe even more likely than Ronny Garcia, Akil Baddoo, and Mason Engler sticking with the Tigers because, to your point, the Rockies are the Rockies. As a reminder for everyone, RJ Petit needs to stay on the Rockies active roster or the injured list for the entire 2026 season to remain in their organization for 2027 and beyond without any restrictions. So that's the big rule to know when it comes to players selected in the Rule 5 draft. And then RJ Petit, I just want to give some thoughts on him. I do think there is talent in that arm. Yes, it is 6'8", 300 pounds, and that probably catches the headlines, but it's a lot of weaponry there. It's 40% sliders, 30% fastballs, 20% sinkers, 10% changeup. So a true 4-pitch mix. Fastball sits at 95 miles an hour. The slider generates a 40% whiff rate. It's really a 2-pitch mix right now because just the sinker and the changeup aren't as successful as the fastball and the slider. But the fastball slider mix, that's good enough that I think RJ Petit should be able to survive against MLB hitters. And then he does have that upper level success in AAA with a 2.74 ERA, a 10.4% walk rate, and a 34.4% strikeout rate. So he's gotten strikeouts at the AAA level. Yes, there are some walk issues, but he has had success in the upper levels of the minor leagues. We'll see what he becomes with the Rockies, but yeah, I do not think we will see RJ Petit in the Tigers organization again until he becomes a coveted free agent and the Tigers go after him and sign him to an Edwin Diaz-like deal. No, I'm just kidding. All right, it's time to get out of here. Thanks to Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for co-hosting with me this week. Thanks to everyone out there for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Drop us a rating and comment what you think about the show, and stick with freep.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, and our magical producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.